Hello. How you doing, Carris?
Hey, Mr. C, how are you?
It's a pleasure to see you here today.
Yes, be even better if it were in person, but alas.
Yes, it would be. You for Thank you for joining us. Um, I'm trying to see who we have here.
We got
Okay.
quite a few people here.
Yeah. Okay. Then let's get started. Um, Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Ray Charles. I'm the Lily Roy Cullen Distinguished Professor of Painting here at University of Houston, and it is my pleasure to introduce this young artist, a dear friend, whom I've known for some time, to our community here. Before I make the intro, I just want to say, um, please, if you have questions, go ahead and log the questions into the chat area, also in the Q&A. We will have time at the end of the lecture for Q&A. Carris did her undergraduate work at the University of Texas at Austin and earned her MFA at the University of Chicago. Since receiving her degree, she has exhibited her work regularly in both solo and group exhibitions at venues including the Studio Museum of Harlem, the Logan Center exhibition at University of Chicago, San Jacinto College Gallery here in Houston, Produce Model Gallery in Chicago, Collar Works in Troy, New York, Tiger Strikes Astro Gallery in Chicago, Jenkins Johnson Gallery in New York, and the Courtyard Gallery at University of Texas, Austin. Her work explores the signs and signifiers that mark the landscape, our landscape. Her work describes the appearances of subjects found during her day-to-day travels, while also referring to various social, cultural, political, and economic circumstances under which we labor. Carris currently lives and works here in Houston. Please help me to welcome Carris to the University of Houston and to our lecture series. So welcome. You want to just go right into it here? Do I just
Yeah, I'm
link
gonna go
off?
right into it. But question, how long I got? How many minutes?
I think you have an hour.
Okay, I'll probably do this in about 30, 40 minutes. And then
Sounds good.
we have Q&A afterwards. So thank you, Mr. C, for that introduction. Mr. C is Michael Ray Charles, for y'all that don't know. Why I call him that, we could get to in the Q&A. But thank you for inviting me. Many thanks to Aaron, thanks to Marcus, and anyone else who I don't know who was able to make this happen. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to jump into it. Cool. I'm also going to stop the video because you don't need to see me necessarily. Alrighty. So my practice is as much about making as it is about looking, right? Those are very equal things for me. And therefore, the first half of this will mostly be images taken by me while in transit. Currently, my work takes the form of painting and drawing of commercial signage found in the landscape. I began this current trajectory of my work in graduate school. However, the ways in which I view the landscape began much earlier. My parents, who were both out there in the internet viewing this on the YouTubes, were bus operators in Dallas, Texas. And in riding the bus with them over the years, I became extremely familiar with not only navigating public space, but using the signs and signifiers of the landscape to make my way through that space. And what I learned early on, which many people like to deny, is that we all learn early how to navigate space based on the aesthetics and performance of people and object in those spaces. Our trust of someone or something can be based on empty lots, the old versus the new. These are taken right outside my grandmother's house, so you can see the monstrosity that they're building as they tear down houses to make room for new ones. Groups of Black people, versus groups of white people are all things we use to justify our assumptions about value and belonging. And of course, signs and language play into this as well. Who gets to say what, how they get to say it, and how mysterious or sexy it appears to be can lead to value judgments and a variety of assumptions. So by signage, I am referring to literal and physical signage, but also sign signifier in the semiotic sense of the word. So in semiotics, a sign or signifier is something that can be interpreted as having meaning, which is something other than itself, therefore able to communicate information to one interpreting or decoding the sign. And one of my favorite painters, Josephine Halverson, who also has a peripatetic practice in which she challenges the idea of plein air painting and still lifes. She describes the definition of signs signifiers as facings. Simply put, a facing is an object that looks back. So you look at it and it looks back at you, right? So therefore, an exchange has occurred. And to expand upon Halverson's language, let me get back to where I am. Here we go. And to expand upon Halverson's language, facings not only look back, but they make you aware of yourself in that space. Therefore, a facing can evoke a feeling, perhaps a question, a memory. They can also point to class, race, gender, and sex, and perhaps even a fantasy. And memories, most of all. Back in the studio, once I get back, after I've seen these things, I take pictures. Sometimes I visit them over and over, usually because they are along some path of transit. I create paintings and drawings that aim to embody the experience of having encountered a facing. And I do this however I need to do formally. I too like to flirt between legibility and illegibility when creating a facing or recreating a facing. I am not beholden to the source image. I just use it as a someone used to tell me they use it as a quarterback, or like I use it as a base. But I can interpret, and more so recently, I can lie. After all, we are living in an era of what someone told me is post-truth. So this piece, Arizona watermelon fruit cocktail, I put this in not necessarily because it is the most successful of my paintings, but I put it in because it marked an idea for something that I didn't quite know how to work through at the time. This was in a show at Sewanee University, or I think it's University of the South, in a show titled Sweepstakes Red. It was a solo show at Carlos Gallery. And just side note, it is one of my dreams one day to have a series of shows that are all have a color, they're all based on some kind of color. It's very similar to Walter Mosley's Easy Rollins series, if anyone's a nerd of reading like I am. So I created this based off of some detritus. I was teaching high school in Chicago, Illinois, and students would, like all teenagers, just leave trash everywhere. And they often would peel off the wrapper to whatever bottle of whatever they were drinking at the time. And Arizona tea was one of them because it's only like $1.10 or something. And I was interested in the fact that this corner store only sold like watermelon and ginseng green tea and maybe some kind of grape flavor, which seemed incredibly racist, but it was also the thing that was selling, right? And I didn't quite know how to work through the idea, but it will come back again later. And here's a painting that was also in Sweepstakes Red. It is Moreno. It's on the side of a building in Pilsen, which is a predominantly Latinx neighborhood. I would even say Mexican neighborhood specifically in Chicago, Illinois. And along the side of the building, it says Moreno, 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 all over and over, painted over and over, because it's obviously probably a family name. But at the same time, Moreno or Morena is something that you would, Spanish term that you would use to signify someone that is Black or of darker skin, right? And just that layering of the language and the layering of this pig that's screaming, smiling, inviting you to come in because it is a meat market. And I just was really interested formally in what was happening there. Here's a Licorice Lounge. Licorice Lounge is a lounge bar space, South Side Chicago. And I loved it. I love the idea that it said Licorice Lounge, that it was declaring itself a Black space in an already Black space. And I had a job that was at the end of 71st Street. And at night when I was leaving, I would take this stretch all the way home. And I made several paintings along that route. And this is just one of them. It also was in sweepstakes red. But here I enjoyed the language. I liked that it was Black on top of Black on top of Black. And driving past at night, especially when someone was like going in, they probably just got off the train going in for a nightcap or something. They would open the door and it was like red would just kind of pour out because the whole bar was red lit. And I just love that. I love the idea and the mystery of what was happening inside. And because I like stupid stuff like vampires and witches too, it also had that kind of what my friend likes to call the occultish feeling to it. But I really wanted to make something that you couldn't tell if it was coming or going, that it was fading in and out of the space, that it was declaring itself a Black space, but it also had a kind of velvety feel, and vibrated red, actually. So I came to a point about 2 years ago where I didn't want to paint on canvas anymore, and someone can ask me about that later. But I started making drawings. So one of my last shows in Chicago at Goldfinch Gallery was entitled Double Talk, and it was a show of just works on paper. Well, except for one painting, which we'll get to later. But here I was investigating erasure, or the absence of language, and in the signage in itself. So we saw this image earlier as I was kind of clicking through. Even though it probably says Nancy's, I'm sure, I was very, very interested in the fact that something that was clearly gone, and was not coming back anytime soon could hold you in a space, right? So the silhouette of something, the light of something, or the lack thereof, the absence, could hold you while you sit there and try to decipher what it means. Although this thing has really nothing to do with me and my day to day, if that makes sense. And yeah, it's just like it's this glowing absence of a sign that is pointing to something that is gone, and you really are trying to project onto it what it could mean, who it could belong to, and where it places you. And here's an installation view of Double Talk. So the drawings in the show are all untitled. I struggle with titling work, probably like everybody else. And but I did put them in a series, and it's called the Thick series. And if anyone is familiar with Thick, the book by Dr. Tressie McMillan Cottom, it's a great book of essays. She just won the MacArthur Genius Grant, which I know that's not technically called the Genius Grant, but she just won it, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, for her work. And Thick is a book of essays where really she's also talking about facings, but she's talking about facings as a Black woman, and you as a Black person being the facing, right? So that you walk into a space, and you are already having to contend with everybody's ideas and assumptions around you of who you could be, your value, and how you operate. And that is the basis of that book, Thick. And the only painting in that show is titled The Seeds. And going back to the Arizona tea painting, I was really trying to think of what are the signs or signifiers, or perhaps like the objects that you can take with you. What are the things that you hold in your hand, you put in your pocket or your bag, which everybody in Chicago is carrying a bag all the time, and they make it home with you outside of just thinking of it, and the memory of it. And this comes from David's Sunflower Seeds pack. It says, eat, spit, and be happy. And it's my goal one day to have a show that is composed of paintings or drawings that have my parents' name on them. So my mother's name is Brenda and my father's name is David. And I just so happened, again, I lived in Chicago in the Sweet Symphony on 35th in MLK. And there's a train on one end, there's a bus on another, there's a high school in front, there's a middle school in back. So my yard would often have quite a bit of trash in it as people are walking between all of those spaces and stopping at the corner stores on the block. And David's sunflower seeds, one, just is disgusting, the kind of idea that someone's putting something in their mouth and they're spitting it back out, but that it was also nacho cheese flavored. And that's what caught me. Like I was picking up trash in the yard, but it was like, oh, this is disgusting. It's nacho cheese flavored sunflower seeds. And then I just thought how ridiculous it is to eat, spit, and be happy. Like who came up with that slogan? How dumb it could be. And so I wanted to make something that was pointing or continuing to point to the absurdity of it all, right? And in the mix of this show, the reason why I put this painting in the show is because it is doing the opposite things of the drawing, right? The drawings in their absence and their erasure are asking you to project onto it, where this painting is telling you what it wants you to think or how it wants you to behave. It's also done on reused billboard vinyl because I don't want to paint on canvas anymore. And the reused billboard vinyl allowed for it to have, to be a little bit more tactile. It's variant in dimensions. It has grommets, so I can hang it and change it however I want. And this is hopefully the first in a series of things. Again, continuing to not paint on canvas, I did a residency at Sputnik Printmaking Co-op in Chicago, Illinois, where I made a series of prints. And there I was introduced to this material called Duralar. And Duralar is primarily used, from what I understand, for like architectural drawings and things like that. It has a kind of translucency like vellum, but it's way thicker. I believe it's a kind of polyester film of some sort. Way more durable, right? Like you have to put in some effort to crease it and to bend it. It can really just take a beating. And I became interested in creating my own alphabet, but I wanted to create my own alphabet that could only spell or hint at the words liquor, cash, beauty, and church. And therefore, every time I show the selection of letters, I can mix and match how I want to create whatever, or to even hint at something. And the reason why those things is because if you strip a place down to its bare bones, you are always going to have a liquor store, a beauty shop, some place for cash checking, cash exchange, and you're going to have a church because those things make the most money. Those are also things in which people fortunately and unfortunately tend to participate in anti-Blackness. It's also spaces, somewhat to the exception of the church, but there's often a middleman minority there. And a middleman minority is a minority population that links producers and consumers. So you tend to see in Black and brown areas, like we do not own the cash joint, we tend not to own the liquor store, we tend not to own the beauty supply. The church is different. Maybe we do own the church, maybe we participate in the church, but even then there's like this directive that is given there in which someone is trying to save you. And so that selection of work, I started it in Chicago and continued once I got here in Houston, almost at Chicago. I got here in Houston in September 2019. So I've only been here a little bit over a year. And unfortunately, 6 or 7 months of that have been in my apartment, but it's been quite fruitful, honestly. And I've been treating it like a year-long residency. So I was invited by Bradley Brown, who teaches at San Jack, to put up a group show with Sebastian Bonsi and Matt Manalo. Sebastian is a photographer and Matt Manalo is a mixed media artist, both working in Houston. We suspended the letters along an aluminum piping and had some crazy clamps. It kind of clamped them to it. I pulled this. I was in love with Amy Sillman. I love Amy Sillman's work, and she put up a show at the Arts Club Chicago, I think right before I left. So it was probably the summer of 2019. And it was just one of those shows that blew me away. And she had essentially something similar, but she spanned one end of the gallery to the other, hanging up drawings and prints that were printed on both sides. And I just remembered I wanted to do something like that one of these days. And then I got the opportunity. So thanks, Bradley. The title of that show was The Ways They Are, if I'm getting that correctly. Sebastian titled it. So if I got it wrong, I'm going to blame him. So the works, we space it out. Again, I'm interested in the eraser. I'm interested in actually hear the light that can physically penetrate the surface of these things. And then when you get up close to them, they do break apart. Like you can see all the marks, you can see all the scratches, and they are painted on both sides. Now they're painted on both sides, but that doesn't mean that they're legible on both sides. So if it reads liquor or it hints to the word liquor from left to right, it doesn't mean it necessarily does that on the reverse. And here's cash. These are acrylic and graphite on Duralar, and each sheet is 20 inches by 40 inches. And here's beauty. And then here's an installation shot of that. The show opened in February 2020, but as we all know, by March, we were indoors. And I haven't seen that work since. So hopefully it's okay and it's in good shape. All right, and because of the pandemic and just the fantastic plan and execution from our government, I had a residency planned in New Zealand at the Wita Arua School of Art in Wellington, New Zealand for this Flat Earthers project. But because of that, I am no longer able to go. And I decided, because I was actually really excited about this project, to just show you guys the digital sketch and the proposal for what I was going to create. And so Flat Earthers, first and foremost, is curated by Raywin Martin and John Lake, and they're two artists in New Zealand who invited a group of artists from around the globe, truly around the globe, to speak to misinformation or to create work or submit work about misinformation in the digital age. And we got the title Flat Earthers because John Lake, who's a photographer, stumbled upon a Flat Earthers conference happening in Wellington, New Zealand. So even in this digital age, and because of just this great distrust and apathy, there are conferences being held about whether or not, you know, the earth is actually round. And so everybody, he has, sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but he has several images. He documented this entire conference of people coming together to speak about the hoax that was the moon landing, why the earth is not round, perhaps it is flat, or perhaps it is shaped like a donut. So I invite everybody to check out John Lake and his Flat Earthers documentation. And for me, when Raywin asked, I was very interested in doing, in creating some screen prints, actually. I wanted to create some screen prints on velvet, if not like the velvet paper of plantation signage found here throughout Houston, Texas. So I'm not from Houston, I'm from Dallas. Dallas has its own problems, but one of those is the language of cotton. And perhaps because it's cotton, we don't overthink it so much. You know, you have like the Cotton Bowl, you have cotton this, you have cotton that. But here, there's places like plantation apartment homes. So when I was hunting for an apartment, moving from Chicago, I remember having to tell the realtor, like, don't send me anything with the word plantation in it. So then she sent me something with the word colonial in it. Needless to say, she wasn't my realtor for too much longer. So here I created, this is just a mock-up of them. Hopefully I'll get to do that residency one day. If not, I'll probably just do these on my own. But I wanted to create some screen prints of the word plantation. And I also wanted to have the slogans. I designed it so that the slogans are also a part of the screen print. And here it says, "Sweet home where the skies are always," and it's blank, but your mind will inevitably fill in the word blue. And the reason I wanted them as white on white, because one, other than white on white speaking to whiteness and power, but people also take white and something velvet. They also take mystery as to mean expensive. Like I said earlier, you see in affluent areas, they never just tell you what the thing is sometimes. It's all about appealing to you in some form or fashion. Versus in a black and brown area, like this is where you can get your food, this is where you can wash your clothes, this is where you can cash your check. There was a place I saw in Chicago once. It was called Art and Science, and I thought, oh, okay, this is going to be about art and science. And it was the hair salon, right? But it just, the fact that it said art and science, and it's like art and science hair salon, okay, sure, right? But so there's this way in which we use language to entice you. And so I wondered, like, can I do that with the plantation catering, a taste for the memories? And here's Plantation Furniture, a boutique you design, we deliver. And here's a mock-up for how I wanted to install that. We still don't know if the show is going to happen. We got the money for it. We got funding for it. So we're just kind of holding tight to see what happens with our government today at the end of the day, and also what happens with the coronavirus. So this is the mock-up that I proposed at the engine room. I also proposed to make it even more absurd and to put some kind of like streamer or one of those, balloon dancing men in it. Because although these places appear, or I want them to appear expensive or appear sexy, they're also relatively cheap. Plantation apartment homes, I would never live in them, not only because of the name plantation, but just because how raggedy they are. Same with plantation catering and same with plantation furniture. They weren't necessarily like the most expensive or even interesting things. And because the show is in New Zealand, the curators were concerned that a New Zealand audience would not get the gravity or not understand the gravity of my gripe about plantations and the history of that language here in the US. So I invited Fola Fayanjuola. He's a writer and a really good friend of mine in Chicago, Illinois. And I asked him to write something based off of these signs. Fola is Nigerian, born and raised, and then he came here to the US in his adult life. So he's also having to kind of labor through ideas of Blackness and class and place that I thought was very interesting. So we tend to always be having conversations about that. And so I'll read you the first two paragraphs. This collection consists of recreations of actual signs seen in Houston, Texas in 2020. They are not artifacts from a bygone era, neither are they relics found in the back of an antique store forgotten and left to ruin. These are actual signs in present day use that serve the precise function of attracting clientele for their respective businesses. In this case, a catering company, a block of apartments, and a family-owned furniture store. The absurdity of these examples is only made clearer when parallel parked with another site of untold crimes to humanity in the annals of our shared history, the Nazi concentration camps. Now imagine if in 2020 it is deemed fit and evidence of an astute business mind to name a business Auschwitz catering services or concentration camp high rises. Surely this would incite deep outrage from all quarters, but somehow the use of plantation to peddle businesses doesn't strike the same chord for the obvious and not so obvious reasons. And then he goes on for about another 2 paragraphs. And the rest of this, if you're interested in reading, can be found on flatearthers.space, or you can find it on my website. Now, the inclusion of the marginalia, I read a lot. I'd like to think that I'm a writer, but I am not a writer. It's just one of those fantasies that I have. and one of my favorite writers, Ryan Holiday, talked about how he keeps track of the notes in his books and the margins, right? And so there's all these books also written about what other writers and politics write in the margins of their books or what they've written in their journals. And I just thought it was interesting that Falah and I include our conversation about this text and developing this text in the margins. So you will see here, I think we were going to call it something about pyramids was the title. And you see that we're saying like, yep, I've been thinking a lot about pyramids. And one of us is like, what about them? And that pyramids were built on slave labor. And it's like, oh yeah, for sure. So was the Colosseum. And the question, do the atrocities blur out the farther we are away from them? Is this happening with the word plantation? Now, last but not least, things that I have just finished because we are still in quarantine, regardless of what people say. And because I don't know too many people in Houston, I have been in my apartment making paintings. As I said earlier, on March 9th was the last time I entered into any office. I also work for a nonprofit, and I stopped teaching up until August. I didn't see inside another building. And so um, I've been treating this time as a residency. And so here's a painting that I've made. Again, because I don't have any interest in painting on canvas, I've switched to PVC panel. This is oil and acrylic on a PVC panel, and it's untitled, but maybe the working title is We Take All. Here's Shea Bryn. Earlier, I said that one of my things is I want to make a suite of paintings with my parents' name in it one day. My mother's name is Brenda. And way back when I first got to Houston, I saw a hair salon it was Shea Bryn's Hair Boutique or something like that. And I just thought about how people would joke with my mother all the time that she should open up her own braiding shop because she would always have me in braids and beads. And so I made this painting, Shea Bryn's Braids and Beads. So again, as I've continued on in my practice, I've gotten away from, I don't actually feel that I owe the shop or the store any idea of what I'm doing. So people tend to ask me like, oh, did you take this painting back to the original Shea Bryn and show them? And I don't. It's not about that for me. It's about imagining the space, imagining what it could have been, or just really embodying what I felt the first time I saw it. So when I saw Shea Bryn, I immediately transported back to the memory of my mother braiding my hair and her sisters saying like, we should own a shop and call it Bryn's Braids and Beads. And so that's where this comes from. Here, this says High Times on the painting, but the title of it is How You Got Over. And I made a cousin to it, and it says While We Were Under. And I believe that's it. Thank you. Are you there, Mr. C?
I am. Thank you. That was pretty nice.
Oh, you so sweet.
Paintings. I hadn't seen those. There's one behind you, by the way.
Oh yeah, I put that on the wall especially for you, sir. Okay, couldn't have a blank wall behind me.
So you've come a long way, and since the time I first met you at Texas, Chicago is heavily played a significant role in your development. I see, not just in the program, but outside of the program. It's interesting. You're picking up trash that your backyard seems to have been an intersection of different types of activity experiences, and whatever happened in these other areas spilled over to a certain degree into your space, and you begin to use that as a source of inspiration. Can you talk a bit more about that? I find that really intriguing as a source of where do I find this inspiration, and moreover, um, why is this looking at what discarded by others as being important enough to be amplified?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Unfortunately, for me, it has very much felt like a calling of something. I For a long time, I just refused to acknowledge it because you'll start to pick up. Not only will you just be like looking for trash, which is just a horrible thing, like just like looking down all the time where you're walking, but you then start to wonder about why you're picking up the items that you're picking up. And the sunflower seeds just had my dad's name on them. And it just happened to look back at me at a time when I thought how absurd it is of a slogan that says "Eat, spit, and be happy." And so, unfortunately, Mr. C, it really is kind of based on intuition. You know, if it recalls a memory and it makes me sit there and really, really think about it, then I then understand that I have to do something with this. You know, I never know what at first, but I have to do something with it. So that sunflower seed that was somebody else's stayed in my sketchbook for a long time before I made anything. Same with the Arizona wrapper. And I knew that I wanted to eventually pivot to things that you could take with you and that you literally can hold in your hand, you know, and the slogans, but I just didn't know which one it would be, like when that would happen, so to speak. Um, yeah, and the other thing that I picked up in my yard quite a bit was lotto tickets. So I've been collecting lotto tickets found on the ground, and I haven't done anything with them. I've tried several paintings with lotto tickets, and I'm having my uncle save his right now because I like the idea of losing, of playing to lose, but I don't know exactly what's gonna come from that. I know exactly why I think it, but I don't know what's gonna come from it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have a question, and this question has occurred several times or was offered by several people, and it's about your move from canvas, and why is that? How did that happen? How did you arrive on this particular material?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, when you go to a painting class, the first thing they teach you is to paint on canvas, unless it's a watercolor class or something like that, right? Um, and I painted on canvas for a long time because I just thought it was the thing to do. And I understood that other people painted on panel, and you know, Kerry James Marshall paints on PVC panel. He's painted on like fiberglass. You know, he's painted on quite a few different surfaces. But for some reason, for a long time, even in grad school, I labored with the idea of painting on canvas. And really, the decision, which a lot of my decisions come like this, they are based on intuition and I'm going to sound crazy, but a whisper. Um, and what I mean is a whisper is that the moment when you are debating something and the answer comes to you in a whisper, and then you know exactly what you need to do, that's kind of what happened with the canvas. And it just so happened, it was happening. I was putting up some paintings at Expo Chicago. I had stretchers made and delivered to my studio, and the stretcher was 5 inches too short, and the art handlers were coming to pick up the paintings like in a couple hours, you know. And so I didn't have enough time to remake a stretcher, but it just came to me then. It's like, I don't know why I'm doing this. Like, why? You know, it had to come out of a time of just like trauma. And then I had to cut down the paintings and reconfigure them so that they could be shown unstretched. And that just wasn't the plan. It worked out, but it wasn't the plan. And furthermore, these paintings, I wouldn't say that they have a connection to art history in that way. You know, if you're painting on canvas, you're already painting, which is inevitably going to put you in conversation with other paintings like it. But painting on canvas, the canvas has nothing to do with signage really. And so when I switched, or when I stopped, I started to think about, okay, what material has a better connection to actual signage that isn't canvas, right? People don't hang canvases necessarily, but they don't hang canvases like cotton canvas, duck canvas. They don't hang canvases to advertise like their hair salon. You know, it's a vinyl banner. It's PVC. It's a neon light. So I'm starting to pivot into those spaces.
Well, you said something interesting that intrigues me. That brings me back to some of the earlier things that you talked about. You talked about liquor, caste, beauty, and church. And there's a history. Obviously, there's a history of folks who've worked with image and text, and image, text as image, text that functions in similar ways that it does within its original context, and of course in other ways. How are you playing within that space? And who could you reference in terms of what types of artists that are working in similar fashion?
That's interesting. So unfortunately, I could talk about artists who you have Kay Rosen, you have Lawrence Weiner, you have Ed Ruscha, you've got Glenn Ligon. But I would argue some of these people are working with image as text or text as image, but not too many of them are working with vernacular. And so vernacular signage in the landscape, on the street kind of thing. So Lawrence Weiner is, well, let me not say Lawrence Weiner, because his stuff is a little weird to me. But Ed Ruscha, for instance, who's working with text as image, but those things are arbitrary, right? Like he picks text and then he picks an image and he puts them together. And he has said this, it's arbitrary, that he wants to see what connections he can make the viewer have by putting those two things together. Kay Rosen is an artist in Indiana, but she does a lot of work in Chicago. And she's interested in linguistics, right? In the text as image, but she's not necessarily speaking to how that, none of them are speaking to how the text and that language operates in space, and the implications of that text. Bethany Collins, who's an awesome person, is one person that I think about who's thinking about language and how it operates, and words from the dictionary and how they came to be in that dictionary, and the definitions, how those definitions have changed over time and the racial implications of them.
So you are interested in racial implications in the use of text, the placement of text.
Yeah, I mean, can I not be?
Of course you could. You remember that question you asked me some years ago.
I do. Yeah.
Now I have to divulge. I brought it up.
Yeah, you do.
That question was, and you could correct me, as I can recall, that question was about identity, and as an artist working, a working artist of color, there was pressure or not to work in the realm of identity, correct? So the question was there, more or less about that, right?
Yeah, the question was like, essentially, do I have to work, because I'm a Black woman and an artist, does my work have to be about identity politics, right? Because all the artwork that you're seeing most of the time is about that. But at the time when I asked it, this was about 10 years ago, I didn't have the language, or even the range to think about all the other ways in which like language can be implicit in the politics of identity. I'll say, not identity politics, but the politics of identity. So you are having to encounter the things around you, right? Not necessarily how you project or how you perform in the world. And at the time, I was just, I was kind of over it. Like every artist that I was seeing, especially every Black artist I was seeing, it was always identity politics. and in this very specific way, like dealing with the body, dealing with sexuality, dealing with that performance. And I just knew that I was trying to make work like that in undergrad, but I would always hit an end. And I knew that if I wanted to be an artist, I can't hit an end. Like, what if I hit the end, I'm done. And so perhaps this isn't the lane that I need to be working in. So then I just pivoted. By the time I got to grad school, I pivoted to things that I was already thinking about, but I was scared to make because I didn't think that it was like complicated enough, or that it didn't point to enough. And so I just finally like looked around seriously. Like I looked around and saw like, what are the books in my room about? You know, like what am I reading today? What are those things? I'm reading A Lesson Before Dying for the umpteenth time, you know, and like I'm reading Walter Mosley. You know, I'm reading these things that are about like having to operate in a space where everything has already been predetermined by something else.
So the signifiers are already there. You know, I often think about like money, right? The fonts that's used on money. I'm not going to say, I think it's Baskerville. I may be wrong, but that particular font.
It is Baskerville.
It is, okay. Yeah. That font is used by the government, right? And when you see that font, you just subconsciously, you understand it to have a significant presence in terms of what it represents. You know, and there's certain, obviously, you know, there are different kinds of signs and different kinds of areas, and with very specific intention to communicate with people who occupy certain areas. But have you ever explored even further into not just the signs or the words, but the fonts that are being used in certain areas?
I have, yeah, I have. It's something that I did. I actually started with that in undergrad. I had, dang, his name just blanked on me. The sculptor, Jeff something. What was his name? At UT Austin, Jeff Williams. I had Jeff Williams in the class, and I made drawings that were based on restaurant signs in Austin, and quite a few of them. And I didn't, those things are coming back now, especially while I'm like in quarantine. But like the font that we use for Asian restaurants, right? Very, very specific, right? This kind of like, you know, supposed to be reminiscent of a calligraphy and that kind of sweeping of the brush mark, but it's done very bad, right? So I've thought about that. I've thought about how Mexican, and I'm saying Mexican specifically, restaurants, or let's say Tex-Mex, tend to have fonts that are meant to invoke the body and movement. So it kind of looks like a party is happening, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like fiesta, right? Like supposed to look like a dress, it's supposed to look like a hat. And I found a few, because I started thinking like, well, okay, well, what is the black, what's the black version of this? What does our signage look like? Like, what's the font that we use? And for us, making wide generalizations here, but it's really been quite dependent on color and language, you know, so like French Kiss collection, the font maybe, you know what I mean? French Kiss collection, Ain't She Sweet Cafe, Give Me Some Sugar Cafe, you know, like it's been really, really steeped in language and pulling, I loved, I was so sad when I saw it go. There was a moving truck in Chicago that said, it was two moving trucks, and one of them said, "I'll take you there," and the other one said, "If you're ready now." You know, like it was just, I thought it was so good.
That's a song.
Yeah, it was so good. It's like, oh, I'll take you there. What'd you say?
Two trucks moving in different directions.
Yeah, but they belong to the same guy. So it was
okay.
Yeah, they belong to the same dude because they had the same number. But one of them was like, "I'll take you there if you're ready now," and then they like part. You know, and it was just so good. But it was just like red. It was painted in that like sign painter's font, that kind of like italicized, like moving, but it was really steeped in the language of it all. And that I do have Chicago to thank for that, because they just so steeped in music and culture in that way.
Yeah.
And just such a large population of Black people who everybody's hustling. Like the Chicago hustle is a thing. Like there's a word for it because it is a thing.
Well, I have another question, and it reads: it seems that there is conversation surrounding value in your work and practice. The things described in your work yard have something to do with value depletion, thrown away, and then reclaimed by you. The liquor, cash, beauty signs have something to do with what is still valuable and needs to be needed in the end. Sorry, at the end of the day, is needed. I'm sorry. Let me go back.
Okay.
Something to do with what is still valuable and needed in the end times, at the end of the day. I wonder what you see as valuable in painting personally.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. That's an interesting question. What I see that's valuable in painting, as it
Yes.
like in comparison to the signs and signifiers that
Right.
I'm doing. What I see that's valuable in painting. That's an interesting question. Because I don't think I know how to answer that. Like what I see valuable in painting. I think I'm not sure what you mean by like what do I see as valuable.
What
Is
about
painting valuable? Is that
no, what do you see as valuable in expression and being an artist?
Oh, well, doing what you want. I don't know. I think it's simple of just painting. The paintings are valuable because I made them and I wanted them in the space, right? Like that something, I had an idea. It has flowed. I'm going to sound like such a hippie. It has flowed through my body, and it is being projected onto the space, and that is valuable. But what is valuable in painting? I don't know. See, that question makes me think of like, it makes me think, is painting valuable? But I know that that's not what they're asking. So I need that rephrased.
Can we get more clarification from that person? The last question. Let's get another one in, Carris. Can you talk more about your experiences as a young artist in Houston and how it compares to your experiences in Chicago or other cities you lived in?
Sorry, I'm chuckling because I don't have any experiences in Houston. I've only been here 6
right.
months. Yeah, I've been in quarantine. Now, what I will say is that immediately people like Bradley, I met Bradley like a week after I got here, and then he had a show that fell through, and then he thought of me. So him, Matt Manalo, Sebastian Bonsi have been just super awesome to me. Super nice. And wanting to help in whatever way they could. But if you find like a good group of artists and good people, like you will meet those folks. I feel that you're supposed to meet whoever is supposed to be in your life and to pay or to help you along your path. And so thus far, it's been great. I mean, I've been by myself, for 7 months, but I really did think of this, and I'm telling you, I think it helped me not go crazy. Is I thought of this as a year-long residency. I'm like, okay, our government is shit. This ain't about to be figured out in 2 weeks, This is not about to be figured out in 2 weeks. They didn't close down the gym. Okay, Mr. C, I'm going crazy. Let me work out on the balcony, call my dad. I had to create a structure because I also thought to myself, and this is going to sound ridiculous because I don't talk about this too often with a group of people I don't know, but I thought that I asked the universe for this. I asked God that I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to make my work. I wanted to teach. I wanted to live by myself. I want to make my paintings. And so once quarantine happened, I just thought like now is the time to do that as much as I can, And so the Houston scene has been interesting, but I really haven't had any parts of it because I only got to see it for about 6 months, and then I've been in my apartment ever since.
How do you think about your audience
Yeah.
relative to the work?
Mm-hmm.
And if I could expand upon that, how do you think about the work relative to the space? Can you talk about that a little bit more? Because I know you said you had something that was going to take you abroad, was an opportunity to discuss work.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, first off, how do you think about your audience
Mm-hmm.
relative to your work?
Mm-hmm. Well, how I think about the audience, I don't necessarily Simone Leigh said something once when somebody wrote something crazy about her work in the Whitney. She had this long list of like, if you don't get these references, then my work isn't for you, which I really, really loved. It's a fantastic list. People should check it out. I don't think I'm that bold. I understand that my audience or an audience is a variety of people. I also understand that audiences are typically white, affluent people. So, like I don't think I can divorce that, especially in the art world. But, or I should say, collectors are white, affluent people. But I make my things, one, I make them for myself. Two, I also make them because I feel like that they can be put out into the world, even if you don't know where Give Me Some Sugar Cafe is. You may be inclined to think of a cafe. You may be inclined to think of the phrase "Give me some sugar." Perhaps you think of an older Black woman who's blasting gospel music from behind the counter, or maybe you think of your grandma or something, whoever she may be, whoever that person may be. But there are some things that no audience can deny, like a A1 beer, wine, and liquor. Like you understand exactly like what that place may look like and what will be inside. Very similar to American beauty supply. Like you're going to understand what that is. So I tend not to assume that the audience doesn't get it, which maybe I should.
But it's interesting. Not to cut you off. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you keep going back to beauty, um, um, the type of language
Mm-hmm.
that would be easily accessible in Black communities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I haven't gone to the liquor or cash stores or church yet with this. So, in a sense, do you see yourself as creating a different type of portrait?
No, I don't.
Black community or other communities?
No, I don't think so. I think if anything, I would just be like highlighting a cosmology of the things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I don't think I would. I don't think I'm recreating anything.
So, can you talk a little bit more about some of your adventures since graduate school? Because you did a lot in a short time, even just before coming here to Houston. You served, you participated in the art community or the art world in different capacity. You care to elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. It's always interesting, and I learned this in Austin before I left, and was one of the reasons I knew I had to leave, is because I knew that there wasn't too much I could do there anymore. I was trying to get a job in art administration, and that was impossible in Austin because they just like switch seats like hot potato. Like it was just like somebody would be at the Blanton, and now they're over here, and then now they're over here, and they just like rotate. But I understood early on that I would need to have a job. Quite frankly, like I am not one for the starving artist sleeping on the floor situation. What I tell you earlier, this lipstick's too expensive. This lipstick is expensive. Okay. I don't, I like comfort. Okay. I like comfort. I want to take care of my daddy one day and my mama, like I got to have a job. And it really, I just met so many artists that it was just kind of in my mind that, they didn't pop if they popped at all. You know, there's so many people working out there in the world that their studio is their spare bedroom, and it's been that way for 20 years. And they make because they have a calling to make, not because of fame or celebrity or even money, right? I think about Carmen Herrera, who's what, 101 or something now? Maybe not. Maybe she's like 91. But she kept making paintings even when she wasn't shown, so much so that she had to buy the apartment below her to store her paintings. Like, and I just had to get comfortable early on with, like, if my studio for the rest of my days is the dining nook of my apartment, then so be it, right? And so when I went to Chicago, even in grad school, I understood that I would have to have a job. So I worked in art education for Hyde Park Art Center for a couple of years. I managed and taught after school programs to some of the teens who were also interested in making art and going off to art school and stuff like that. I worked for a couple artists as an assistant to them making their work and trying to help them think through their ideas. And I worked for Rebuild Foundation, which is the Astor Gates Foundation, where it was an interim position, but it was some of the same, like helping with exhibitions and programs and the residency and just a general structure of that place. Because yeah, for me, it was just a no brainer. Like I need to do what I need to do to make it so that I can live how I want to live and make the work I want to make, you know? And there are other people who are like, yeah, you should quit that job. Just go be a barista. And that's cool. I just didn't want to do it. You know, like I was a barista in undergrad and I hated it then, you know? And so I just was like, this isn't what I want to do, you know? Now I have high hopes and delusions about my practice for what it may or may not get to one day. But in the meantime, you know, you've got to have a job. And I will say, I think it's a great disservice that artists, there's so many people in art school who have agreed with themselves that they can't do something because they're an artist. You know, like, oh, I can't work in administration because I don't have the brain for it. Like, do you not have the brain for it and the training, or you just don't want to do it? You know what I mean? And so you have that, and really, I swear, hands down, every time someone has invited me to a show, they're like, Carris, you get your stuff in on time. You know, you complete the paperwork. The artwork is here on time. Thank you so much. Right. And it's because I have a job that I have to do these things. And so, like, I never agreed with the idea that I can't do something. And perhaps this is because my dad wouldn't allow us to say the word can't as kids. But I just never agreed with that, you know. So anything I wanted to do, I tried to do it. If I failed, I failed, but I tried to do it.
Good. Good. Here's a question about work. How do you choose a piece, if a piece is going to be painted instead of photographed or drawn?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of things, the images that I showed early on, quite a few of those things have been made into paintings or drawings, and some of them maybe not, but I keep a morgue, you know, I keep a morgue of images, or a list of, well, one, I do keep a morgue of images, and then two, I also keep a list of all the signs, you know, it's a running list. And, you know, I make something, if I make something out, if I don't, I don't. Now, how something becomes a drawing versus a painting, usually I think I just have an understanding for it. So the drawings, you'll see like that thick series is graphite on paper. It's largely about what is not there, you know, and graphite is good for that. Graphite is good for what is not there, for adding and for taking away. And painting can do it, but it's just a different materiality. And so, and quite frankly, it never worked as a painting, you know.
And have you progressed to collage yet?
No. I highly doubt that I'll get to collage anytime soon. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's a painting that I did that was titled Sweet Mississippi, and it had like a kind of wallpaper treatment, and I screen printed the wallpaper and then adhered it to the surface. But outside of that, I don't think I'll be doing collage.
So your practice appears to lend itself to various types of ways of image making, whether whether collaging, attaching things to the surface, painting, drawing, different mediums, printmaking. Um, you know, I don't see this as I see this as evolving in a sense. The more I get an idea of what you're looking at as a source, you know, I'm sort of envision more installations and things that could be moved, things that one would have to move around, or you know, or even cross over. So I'm sort of envisioning spaces being transformed. Have you? Well, you said you haven't thought about that yet.
No, I said I haven't thought about. I don't do collage.
Yeah.
I don't do collage, but installation, yeah. Like I've proposed a couple of things where I am trying to change the very nature of the space, um, where it's not only painting the space a different color, because right now I'm not interested in white walls either, but
Why
having
not?
different. Why not?
Yeah.
Well, one, there's a logistic issue that every time, you know, white walls are hard to clean and all that good stuff. But then my work and the signs that I see aren't up against a white background. And I haven't gotten a chance to read it yet, but I'll send it to you. Danny Giles, who's an awesome artist, just sent me an article on how the white wall came to be in art, in contemporary art, right? And like art showing, and why it was, you know, as a sign of like value and class to have your things up against a white wall.
Please send it.
Um, it's an article. It's an article. I haven't read it yet.
Okay, but forward it to me. I'd like to read it.
Yeah. I mean, he just sent it to me yesterday. Um, but yeah, I've been thinking of like other things, you know, like why does it have to be up against a white wall? I once painted an entire, I'll say gallery, black, and then hung black paintings on top of that. Like that was just more interesting than a white wall. I think we have been programmed to think that a white wall will make you see the work better, when really it's about you looking at the work. It's not about the wall that it's on, you know. um,
So there's another couple of questions, and I'm gonna try to get them in. Do you think your audience needs to be educated to a certain extent to understand your work?
no. Want me to
Yeah.
elaborate? No, I don't think. No, I don't think they do. Not only do I not think, I don't think they do. I don't think I need to do any more education. I
Yeah.
think it's about the looking and the reading of it. Like if you don't get it, you know, if you don't understand the significance of Black Star hardware or even the language Black Star, um, that's for you to figure out.
So how much is your work influenced by you know, visual culture?
It's not. I wouldn't say. You mean like visual, like in pop culture?
Visual culture. It's a term that comes out of a sort of a art education and art history, where I think it's Mirzoff is the guy's name, who was doing work that centers around signs and how they function within the cultural, sociological context,
Mm-hmm.
and how we read and interpret those signs.
Mm-hmm. But visual culture now is, when I think about visual culture, I think about pop culture, right? Like I
Well,
think
that's
about I think about pop culture and like visually, like your phone and apps and all those things.
mhm.
So that's visual culture is those things now. So in that regard, there is no real influence.
I think the term would encompass that. One second, I'll read out the
Mhm.
definition. I want to say his name is Peter Mirzoff. Here it is. What is visual culture? Mirzoff summary. Uh, Mirzoff explains the importance of race and ethnicity, gender and sexuality, and the body in visual culture. These various forms of social discourse provide essential tools for reading images and thus define the subject of visual culture as an inherently political object or project. Sorry, project.
Yeah, I remember him. I remember the text that you're talking about. I also can like see his face in my head. But I think I read something with Charisse. Charisse had us
Yeah.
read something. But yeah, I wouldn't say that it does. if we're talking about visual culture and the ways in which like social media, pop culture, the printed image, I'm not thinking about it like that. The only visual culture I'm probably interested in is that of the landscape.
Mm-hmm. So that piece you hung up here that opened just before to the pandemic with the yellow and black images, the fonts that spelled out liquor with absent text. I really dug that as an image because the fonts began to break away from their direct references in a certain way that was different. And I'm curious to know if, you know, I see the text of fonts broken up in a different way in the last couple of images. And I'm curious to know if that is something you're going to continue with, where the fracturing of that, of a specific alphabet is in and of itself a work, and that it doesn't have to be included next to, or, you know, another letter, you know?
Yes. That's two things. One, the kind of fracturing of the language, like in this piece behind me, is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
The actual thing, High Times, is a store, you know, like a head shop somewhere on like Southwest Houston. And the marquee for that is largely green because they're proposing weed, although they can't sell it in the state of Texas. But the letters are kind of dancing, you know? And so in that, I wanted to make something similar. So formally, I was recalling that, but I'm also just really interested in lying. I'm interested in lying now. Like it's, so there's this really awesome writer. His name is Marlon James, and he won the Man Booker Prize. He's also just I've read all his books. I'm waiting for the next ones. And one of his greatest is A Brief History of Seven Killings, in which he's talking about Jamaican crime as it moved out of Jamaica into New York, but right after the assassination attempt of Bob Marley. And so much of it, he's saying in the book, as he's like writing, like, I think it's like 15, 20, probably even more than that, different characters. Like he's pieced together this information over the years and research, but there's absolutely no way for you to know what is true and what is not. You know, you can maybe think that one of the characters is this person. It can be hinted that it could be this person or this person, but there's no way for you to know, you know. And his most recent book is a trilogy, all revolving around one incident, but told three different ways. So then in the end, you won't know what's true or what's not. And so I've just really been interested in lying, you know, like in lying and flirting with legibility and illegibility, especially in this age. And so I am interested in creating an alphabet that stands on its own, not necessarily in reference to something else next to it. He didn't do this, but Al Held kind of sort of did something similar, except he was really just interested in like formally like zooming in on a letter, you know, and painting it. And then the viewer, it would create and divide space. And then the viewer could guess as to the letter, but it really didn't have anything to do with the letter, you know, like it had nothing really to do with the letter. I'm interested in those two things put together. Like, can I make an alphabet that is pulled from all these other alphabets, yet referencing nothing, and you can't really say anything about it? Or can I make just your standard alphabet, but lie? And perhaps like lie about the order or lie about the form of it. So it's a couple of things. So yes and yes to those questions.
You know, it's interesting you're talking about that, about the alphabet in that way. I can't help but to think about not the alphabet itself, but the tool which creates the alphabet. Obviously, every tool has its strengths and weaknesses and abilities. It reminds me of an image of a typewriter, one of the old ones that would hit the paper, hit the ink tape, and then that would hit the paper and leave the imprint. But the closer you got to that image, or the larger you made it, you were able to see that it wasn't as smooth, crisp, and clean around the edges. The surface of the paper affected the edge of the font just as much as the speed at which and the aggression as which the mechanic element created it, created that interaction. And I'm curious to see how your work evolves with regards to the technology playing a role. And you mentioned vinyl, and you're doing digital sketches here. I don't know what that is. I'm curious to know if that's something that's beginning to influence the work.
Digitally right now, it's only a tool for the work, because I enjoy the physicality of the thing so much, like I enjoy mixing paint. Like I enjoy, there is a meditation that happens when you're painting, and like the paint being transferred, you using your brush to dip into the paint to then transfer it to a surface, and then it making that mark on the surface, is like closer to this idea that you have. And so right now, digital work is a tool, and I've used it during quarantine more than I ever have, because I needed to, like there was quite a few shows or projects that for everybody else we thought were going to happen, and then they didn't, but we maybe spent the money, or they already gave us the money and you can't give it back, like there's all this stuff, so you had to figure out a new form for it to take. I would like to start moving into some digital forms in which I can I hate the word play, but in which I could experiment with, and it will help me perhaps figure out this alphabet conundrum. But as it being one of the mediums in which I work, I'm not too sure yet.
Well, how about one more?
Okay.
Look at the time here. What did you learn in graduate school among your peers and professors that have helped you to maintain your practice? Also, I love your podcast. So you have a fan out there.
Oh, thanks. I never expected to hear that. Like, I love your podcast. I'm like, what? Oh yeah, I did a podcast once. What did I learn? I learned a lot of things. One of the things that I learned was nobody's gonna make the work for you, quite frankly. I had a lot of stuff to prove to myself in grad school. So I put a lot of pressure on myself that was good and was bad all the same. But when I entered grad school, I entered with the idea that one, I'm going into debt. Two, this needs to work. Okay. So you're only going to get from it, whatever it is that you put in. Right. We had studios at the Logan Center. I would get there at 7 a.m. and I often left at like 8, 9 o'clock at night, right? I painted in between my classes. My studio was my other house, so much so that I would like get sad and cry when I went to my apartment, because I was just like, oh, now I got to do laundry, like I was just like, I got to do all this other stuff. And Christina Coleman, who was here last week, right? Christina talked to them last week. I called Christina and I was like, Christina, what do I do? And she's like, just wash your clothes, like it'll be fine. And so in grad school, one, I taught that you have to put in the work. For me, if you weren't working in grad school, it's indicative of you're not going to work when you get out. You've been given some, hopefully, at least for my case, you were given an amount of funding. You got a studio, you got a little piece of a job, I got an apartment. And you have to do the work. Like you have all these other things that have given to you. And if you're not doing them, then you're not going to make work when you leave. And the professors I had at U Chicago were really great. in terms of talking about work. I learned how to talk about work and to think about it a little bit more effectively there. David Shutter is one of my favorites, and he just moved to Germany. He gave us a robust reading list that I hated, but in the end, it really amplified things that I was already thinking about, like the sign and signifier of something. And how, your buildings downtown are built in a particular way because they want you to feel that this is a space of importance, so what is something of it? What does a space tell you? What do spaces tell you? What is it that they want you to think? Most importantly, in graduate school, especially at UChicago, although it was an incredibly theoretical place, your form has to match your concept. There's quite a few programs out there where it's the idea is you can throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, and then you're going to have a masterpiece, and that's just not the case. Why did you make the decisions that you made? So I think most importantly for me in graduate school, none of the decisions that I make, I would say none of them are arbitrary, right? Even if I feel like something is a calling or it's intuitive, it doesn't mean that it is arbitrary.
So you have any final words for?
Final words, my God. Stay black, protect your magic. No, I don't have any final words. I hope to make some drawings later today and not think about what's happening in the world.
Listen, Carris, I want to thank you personally for continuing to make the work that you feel is important to you. And thank you for your creative contribution. I think artists and creative people need to hear that often. And I'm excited that you're here in Houston. I think you bring a lot of energy and great ideas. And I can't wait to get beyond this COVID and to see you blossom and network in the city. I think you have a lot to offer. So welcome to Houston again. And we'll try to have you back when we could get you face to face. And thank you again for your honesty and your willingness to participate in our community here at UH.
Oh, thank you, Mr. C. Gonna make me shed a tear. Thank you again, and thanks for having me. This is great.
All right. Be in touch.
All right. Bye-bye.